Hello, everybody. Dr. Rick Wallace dropping in on you. Hope everybody is having an unbelievable day. As for me, um, I am full bore into doing the things that I do. I am committed. It has been a very challenging past few weeks, but as you can see, I'm still standing, I'm still in the fight, and I have not come close to being done. And with that being said, I want to talk to you about something that I am immensely passionate about. It's a big part of my purpose, it's a big part of what I do as a professional and in the Black community. I want to remind everybody who's watching that we are in the middle of a fundraiser, and never has it been more important that we get the support of our people to be able to implement and sustain the programs that my research has led to being developed and uh, given exposure and access to the Black community. Black Man Lead, Restoring Ghetto's Forgotten Daughters, and the work we're doing with that. And we'll get to talk about that maybe later, but there's so much to be done. And we simply put, need your support. There's a link in the description box for those who are willing to take the link and go to a secure site and give. You can do that, or you can simply Cash App it to the organization's Cash App handle, which is also in the description box. What I want to talk to you about is something that you've heard me talk about a lot because it's prevalent, because it's relevant, because it's a real issue that isn't going to go away easily. It's something that we're going to have to deal with, and that is the mental health crisis in our community. When I talk about our community, I'm talking specifically the Black community. And when I talk about mental health versus mental illness, I want to make sure that I give clarity to the distinction. When we normally refer to mental health, we're speaking in a positive term. We're speaking in uh, reference to an overall good place as far as your overall mental and emotional health is concerned. It's a covered term that covers every element and component of mental health. And when we talk about mental health, no, we're talking about it from a positive set. When we talk about mental illness, we're talking about some kind of way that there's a deficit, a corruption, a disruption, or a problem within the mental health spectrum that creates an illness within it. And some of the common conditions are depression, which everybody experiences at some level at some point in life. But normally you get over it in a few days, a week, sometimes even the same day. But when it persists, then you have a problem with the persistence of that depression, and then it becomes an illness. An issue. You have more uh, intense forms, schizophrenia, um, even ADHD is considered a part of the mental illness spectrum, and a bunch of other different things that we can name. But one of the biggest issues we're dealing with right now is the inability to manage depression. And in the community, the problem that we see that really is alarming to me is how emphatically this mental health crisis is impacting our youth. And when I speak of youth, I'm speaking specifically of blacks under 30, but generally for blacks under 30, specifically for blacks under 25. And I'm gonna give you some of the numbers. Over the past 6 years, suicides among males between the ages of 15 and 24 has increased to almost 50%, 49 point something. There is a massive increase. What is it? Uh, Females between the ages of 10 and 13 are 60% more likely to attempt suicide. We lead in both categories for females of girls, 10 to 13 and 5 to 11. We are now leading in that category of suicide, not attempts, of actually being successful at taking your own life. Uh, we get to see the high profile cases. We get to see this, the things we are probably still, at some point, still going over what's happening with what happened to Alana Miller. And how many people responded that they didn't see it. Family was saying we didn't see it coming. And that's because on the outside, she was smiling. On the outside, she was engaged on the outside. But let me tell you that, someone asked is if they want to hide it, if they want to cover it up and they've made up in their mind that this is what they're going to do, will you even know that it's coming? No, they're not. Very rarely are they going to sit up and say, well, tomorrow at 9 o'clock, I'm going to commit suicide, because they obviously know what's going to happen. They're going to actually get picked up and they're going to be on a 72-hour hold. So if they're seriously contemplating it, they're going to be probably hush hush until that time comes, and they'll normally leave some type of written explanation of why they did what they did, which is normally coming. There's not always a suicide note or letter, but a lot of the times there is. Or they have talked with someone enough that they've pretty much left a real good map of why they're at where they're at. But to answer the question, will you know? If you're real attentive, and since we're talking about youth, we're talking about people who are normally still within connected reach of their parents, their siblings, their loved ones, and that is an opportunity for family to be effective in hopefully mitigating those suicidal ideations. But you have to be careful. There's no way you go from not being suicidal to being suicidal and there not be something to observe. The problem is there are probably going to be micro shifts, micro evolutions, and you're going to have to be real careful. With me being who I am, I drive everybody in my house nuts because I see every shift. I see every change in behavior, and I ask about it, and it drives them nuts. It's, oh my God. Oh, well, what I'm doing is I'm trying to find out why this is different now. And, in most of the time, it's an easy explanation. It may not be something they want to tell me, but it's not anything that I need to be alarmed about. And that's my job as a parent. My job isn't to make you comfortable all the time. My job is not for you to sit up and just be able to do whatever you want to without ever being questioned. My job is to make sure you're safe. My job is to make sure you're in the best possible place mentally, emotionally, and physically that you can be in. My job is to make sure that the things of life don't come in and consume you before you are developed enough mentally, emotionally to be able to deal with it. So yes, I'm observing you, but there are things you got to pay attention to. Humans by nature are habitual. We have patterns. We do things the same way. Even people who like to say they're spontaneous are habitual in their spontaneity. There's a way that you can kind of tell when they're about to go do something crazy. It's just whether or not you are conditioned. The problem is now we're disconnected as a people. Everybody's doing their own thing. All you have to do if you want to see the problem with disconnectivity is go out and eat with your family. Watch your family, but also watch everybody else. I mean, I was out, we were out eating probably about a year ago. And we're there, and I'm looking over at this table, and there's the mother, the father, and I think 5 kids. And the kids probably aged from about 14 years old down to maybe 2. Every last one of them had their device out. Every last one of them, from the mom, dad, down, had their device up, and they were all in their devices. Even the 2-year-old had a device with a little plastic cover over it, so that if they dropped it, the 2-year-old had a freaking phone. Okay, now let me explain what happens. There's a disconnectivity. Children nowadays are more connected to their devices than they are to their parents. You can't parent that way. You can't create healthy environments that way. That device can never be as sensitive to the idiosyncratic shifts that take place in a child when something's wrong that a parent will when a parent's connected. But we have literally put devices in the places where we belong. and it makes it hard to shift. This isn't about placing blame. This is about sounding an alarm, because I think we've all allowed it to happen to a certain extent. Way too much screen time, which actually is lending to this issue with the mental health crisis. I'll get into that later. Way too much screen time. And then we don't always know what they're into. Man, I got this one daughter. Her whole life, for a long time, my whole life, it seemed, and I know it's not, I'm not being, it's not really that, but for a while, my whole life, it seemed like was coming up with ways to manage what she was doing on that phone, because she was sneaky, and she, so I put, Verizon Family on it, and I put all these all these filters and all this blocks and all this, and I would just constantly get alerts. She circumvented the block. She's just, and it was like, oh my gosh, she's driving me nuts. And I realized, okay, give me the phone. And then we have to build trust from here, because obviously sitting up and trying to give you, it's the battle of the minds. What can I come up with that you're going to have to figure a way around? So figure a way out around not having a phone. And then it goes from there. But what am I getting at? I'm saying that there's a part of this that literally needs to be addressed and understood from the perspective of we're not connected enough. That's a problem with mental health, because we are social beings. We're designed to be in groups. We're designed to work in a ecosystem of connectivity. And when you shake that connectivity up, it creates imbalances within the mental and emotional, psychological, and spiritual realms. And it is. That's why even in prison, there's a limit to how long you can keep someone in isolation, because it literally will start to break them down mentally, and it will start to make them start having illusions, developing alternative realities, and so many other things that really shift and interfere with their ability to be properly socialized and live within a normal social realm. And that is a problem. Now, let me tell you where I think another problem came in. When we were told to shelter in place in almost every state in America, there was some type of mandate about being at home. Companies were shut down, restaurants were shut down, bars were shut down, places where people gather and socialize, all kind of theme parks, all this stuff where people socialize, get together, was shut down. For the people who could go to work, go home, go to the grocery store, go home. And for many things, like for our house, the kids didn't hardly get out at all. So we had to realize, wait a minute, we've got to find a way to get them into a spectrum where they are not shut up in their room. So we had to pull them out of the rooms, bring them down to the family room, and then everybody get together, because they're in those rooms, because that's what teenagers do. But normally when teenagers are in their rooms, they got to get out and go to school. So they're again pushed into a social environment. Well, what happens is, and I told you, what happened is, everybody shut down, everybody at home. And while I won't get into the impact of isolation on your immune system, I will talk about it on your mental health. Okay, so when you isolate someone, now you have to understand the environment that you isolate them in as well. What happens is, isolation automatically starts to mess with your mental health. It starts to create, like I said, the need to create this connectivity that isn't actually existing, and the mind will automatically start to do it. It will not ask your permission. It will simply start to create something to replace what is missing. And that's the first thing. But here's the problem. We weren't just isolated. We were isolated in fear. We were isolated in everybody's going to die. So now adults were freaking out. What do you think kids were doing? Kids are going to manage their stress the way they see their parents manage their stress. If you want to help your kids be better at managing stress, learn how to manage stress yourself. Learn how to be able to look at a stressful situation without showing stress. What you'll do is you will create a more calm environment. You'll create a situation where you will actually be able, in a better situation, to deal with whatever situation is going on. I'll give you a prime example. Most people, when they get into a stressful situation, trigger what we call in lay terms, the fight or flight response. What it is it's actual instinctive, primitive Stress response. It's triggered by the reptilian brain. There are three different primary parts of the brain. The reptilian brain is the most ancient part of the brain. Everything else evolved out from that. And the reptilian brain had one responsibility: keep you alive. So guess what the reptilian's brain primary focus was? Find every problem and every ounce of trouble you can find and identify it so I can run from it. That's a saber-toothed tiger coming. That's the sound of, whatever coming. So I need to either run, or I need to grab my spear or whatever I fought with at the time and get ready to fight for my life. And these stress responses were in that time quick and responsive to a real threat. Well, as time evolved, there were no more saber-tooth tigers, and we got to what we call civilization. And even though there's still threats out there, they're not the same. So now the threats are: I'm going to lose my job. The threats are: is this person going to hit me? That's coming up behind me. The threats are: am I going to have enough money to pay the bills? And the brain still looks for what's wrong. The instinctive nature of the brain is to find what's wrong, which is absolutely diametrically opposed to how you need to think in order to win in life. That's something else. But you've got a brain that's looking for everything wrong. So when it sees it, it triggers the stress response. The problem is with the stress response, this is an old ancient response that's designed for you to fight or run. What are you fighting and what are you running from now? It's nothing to fight. It's nothing to run from. The problem is there for you to figure out. The problem is that's there now that's stressing you. It's actually something that needs to be solved. The problem is when you trigger the stress response, you shut down the prefrontal cortex. Why is that important? Because when you shut down the prefrontal cortex, you shut down the executive functioning of the brain: reasoning, rationale, impulse control, decision making. All the things that allow you to solve a problem are now shut down. Why? Because it takes 30% of your blood flow and oxygen to operate that part of the brain. That oxygen and blood flow is now being sent to your extremities so you can do what? Fight or run. And so now, as long as that you're triggered, you can't think your way out of the problem. And what happens? You normally become more stressed out because the problem doesn't go away, because you can't solve it, because you're stressed out, and it leads to chronic stress. And now everything, you're starting to identify everything and you're stressing. Well, guess what happens to kids when you tell them we've got to stay in the house indefinitely because there's a disease out there killing everybody, when the truth was it was killing about 1% of the people who actually contracted it. But for whatever reason, that was a narrative and everybody's responding to it. And I'm not telling people who responded what way or whatever. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual facts. It had a 99% survival rate. And each variant since then has had a higher survival rate. May have been more contagious, but a higher survival rate. And so, but these kids can't process that. So they are trusting the environment they're in to help them. So now they're isolated and they're afraid and dealing with whatever else they're already dealing with. And, teenage, growing up and moving from being, prepubescent into puberty, into adolescence, and, my God, adolescence. And then having to try to move towards young adulthood. That's a process to navigate. And it normally helps when you have both parents at home. But what about all the kids that don't have all their parents at home? Okay, so now that's just the isolation issue directly with COVID. But you start to look at, even Arlana mentioned COVID. She mentioned COVID. So in essence, she's talking about, she got COVID, she failed some classes, there are a lot of things going on. And she had mentioned that there was a problem before she even got to college, but that definitely exacerbated it. And college, making that transition from high school to college and all the other things. And so she seemed to have been suffering in silence. The problem we're having right now is that we don't have resources. And what we have to understand too, and big shout outs to all of my mental health practitioners, whatever level you're on, if you're a spiritual counselor, if you are a certified counselor, licensed counselor, therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, big ups to you. But here's something that we really need to take consideration into, something that I have prided myself in doing for more than 20 plus years, is understanding that the Black experience is unique. Understanding that if the experience is unique, the psychology is also unique. In other words, you can't take a Eurocentric idea of how someone's minds, emotions, and experiences create their reality and then superimpose the Black experience into it and think you're going to get an effective result in how you help them cope with their issues. The experience is the same. So the psychological reality is different. And so what we have to do, and what I have been able to do with people like Dr. Naeem Akbar and Dr. Amos Wilson leading the way, and me taking the torch and then just tearing my ass with it and getting somewhere, is to reconstruct the concept of psychology, but with an understanding of the Afrocentric experience. And while we are foundational Blacks, African Americans, whatever you want to call ADOS, whatever you want to call us, and our experience is definitely different than indigenous Africans, the Black experience in itself is still a part of the descendancy, genetic descendancy of our African heritage or our African roots. And so that plays a part in it. I proved that in my research in epigenetics, because that's another part where we're having to deal with this problem, is the epigenetic influence on our mental health. So epigenetics, the word epi means on top, genetics is the gene, and gene functionality. And so what we understand is that we literally can genetically pass down trauma, because that was the initial reason for me studying epigenetics. And I learned so much more about it. I found out that epigenetics plays a major role in whether or not we get certain diseases. Epigenetics plays a role in whether or not we get cancer. It had been long believed that cancer was primarily due to, somebody in your genetic line and eating and exposure to things. Carcinogens, eating, and all that makes about 3 or 4% of cancers. Epigenetic influence, huge influence. And I don't mean simply in something being passed down, your mama had it, so you're probably gonna get it. I mean in the way your genes respond to your environment. Genes, everybody has cancer genes. Now, there have to be a certain number of cancer genes upregulated and active at the same time to develop a specific type of cancer. Whatever each cancer has, those certain cancer genes have to be upregulated, activated at the same time to develop it. And it's not as simple or common as you think. While cancer seems to be common, it's not. In when you look at the total number, it's just that it's so prevalent of a killer that we recognize it and we fear it. But here's what happens: the more stress you're involved in, more likely you are to get cancer. The more violence you're around, your environment. If your environment is toxic and bad for you, the chances are you're going to be sick. And it's going to be because of the epigenetic impact. Now, here's the mental health side of that. In that same situation, the badder the environment, the more impact it has on your mental health. Now, when we talk about children, we talk about something we call adverse childhood experiences. We refer to them as ACEs. What are some adverse childhood experiences? Parents separating, parents addicted to alcohol or drugs, parents being incarcerated, parents being violent towards one another or violent towards a child, neglect, emotional, psychological, sexual abuse, I already mentioned neglect, but those are some. There are 10 primaries, but those are some. And so what happens? Each one of those I mentioned is worth 1 point, one ACE. It's called an ACE. One ACE. When a child gets 4 ACEs, 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. So do you think that there's a genetic influence within that? The epigenetic influence is weighing on the psychology of that child. Okay, that same child is 5 to 6 times more likely to develop heart disease, ischemic heart disease. Now, this isn't going to happen immediately. This is going to happen down the line. These outcomes can be traced throughout life. They don't get to a point and stop. These people experience, these young kids are growing up into adults that are experiencing a crisis in physical health because the crisis in mental health was never confronted. It was never intervened on. There was no work done. You take in mind that there is a number of reports that on the liberal side say approximately 60% of all Black females are in some way sexually molested before the age of 18. On the conservative side, the numbers are 40. So even if you sit up and take the conservative numbers, nearly half of our women have been harmed before they were adults. Now, that isn't to say that Black boys escape. I can tell you personally, we don't. We just don't talk about it. So considering that Black men don't talk about it, we're still looking at 1 in 6 to 1 in 8 Black boys that are molested before the age of 18. That's just molestation. That's not the abuse, the beating, and all the other things. That's just sexually molested. You don't think that impacts their mental health? We're not protecting them. We're talking about it, but we're not protecting them. There are far too many of them to say we're protecting them. You can't have 60% and say you protected them. To me, you can't even have 1 in 8 boys, and I guarantee it's much higher than that. They're just not going to talk about it because they're struggling with their sexual identity after that. They're struggling with who they are, and they're probably going to grow up, and most of them are going to be hypersexual, highly promiscuous, unable to control their sexual impulses, creating kids they cannot take care of, and all down the line. They're going to be highly emotional and a bunch of other things because, number one, we didn't protect them. Number two, we didn't get them the help they needed. See, I don't believe in, again, I say it again, I don't believe in coincidences. I don't believe in happenstances. I don't believe in something just out of nowhere. I believe that everything has a cause. For every effect that you feel, there was a cause that created it. And if you don't ever learn to study and look for the cause, you'll never solve the problem. Talking about the problem, you have to find the cause. You have to change what is causing it. You have to deal with what's causing it. And so we can talk about all the things that are going wrong in the community, why we cannot get out of the bottom, off the bottom rung of the socioeconomic ladder, why we have such a high homicide rate amongst ourselves, why we have such a high intimate partner homicide rate. You know, why is it that the second leading cause of death for Black women between the ages of 15 and 44, or Black females between the ages of 15 and 44, is intimate partner violence? Why? Did they just happen to marry or become intimately involved with a person who was born a murderer? No, they weren't born that way. The environment they were in sculpted them, and nobody cared enough to see that the environment wasn't just going to destroy them, that they were probably going to take some people with them. We have a problem, and we seem to be okay with it. And that's what bothers me, is the fact that we seem to be okay. And what I mean by that, I don't mean that you're sitting there going, that ain't my problem. I mean that we're sitting there, we're not doing anything. It hasn't made us uncomfortable enough to take action. We can see, oh my God, on a post means absolutely nothing. Shaking my head, that's ridiculous, I can't believe it. None of that stuff makes a difference. None of it changes the reality. None of it creates a better situation in the future. You have to actually sit up and say, how did that happen? Where did that come from? No, he wasn't born a monster. He was created. She wasn't born a monster, because it's women out there killing their babies. I get so much stuff that comes at me. You can't imagine. Like I told you yesterday, I've got 10 young boys that I have been asked to deal with, and I agreed to, just in one place. That an organization is saying, hey, I got at least 10 I need you to take. And I said, I'm in. I got, I mean, just constantly, I'm getting emails. Hey, can you get this guy tested for me? Can you get these kids tested for this? Can you do, I mean, it's constant. And the thing is, if I don't, what I can't do is say, well, I can do this amount, but you know, I'm gonna have to somebody else gonna have to do the rest. You know, I although I can't do it all, I am not going to uh randomly choose where I stop. I'm gonna do what I can as much as I can, and I'm gonna keep pushing, and I'm gonna keep asking people to help until people start helping. But what I'm not gonna do is sit up and be the person who says you don't get the help. You know, now if something goes wrong before I can get to them, I was getting there, but I was getting there as fast as the resources allowed, as fast as I have. And there's a brother, and I'm not gonna call his name because I don't know he wants to, but a brother who's originally from the East Coast. I think he said South Carolina and by way of Atlanta, now in Michigan, married with two kids. And he reached out and volunteered to be one of the mentors. Now, obviously, I have to train him and I have to get him ready, but he's worked with young Black boys before. So just in being able to connect with him, he already has that part down. Then we get into how we are going to socialize on a psychological level young Black boys to be what they need. That's what Black Men Lead is about. But we're not just talking about Black boys here. We're talking about Black girls. Wait, that that 5 to 11 and that 10 to 13 where we're leading now, those are girls. Predominantly girls are taking their lives. And guess what? A lot of it is coming from social media bullying, but that also comes from the bullying is so devastating because we haven't done a good job of teaching them who they are. You're not as moved by what someone thinks of you or says of you when you know who you are. But when you're not anchored in a true identity of self, where there's something inside of you that borders on on the edge of arrogance, but remains at the highest level of confidence, that ain't nobody can come along and tell me that I'm not awesome. Nobody can come along and tell me I'm not beautiful. One of the things I did with my daughters, and if you follow me before, you heard this story, so bear with me. If not, by the way, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe and click that like button. But anyway, thumbs up button, whatever it is, on whatever wherever you're at. Hey, but with my daughters growing up, from the oldest to the youngest, when I see them passing in the house, no matter how many times I pass them during the day, if I got to go pick them up from somewhere, or if they're being dropped off to me somewhere, or they're passing me in the house or whatever, every time, who's the most beautiful girl in the world? From the moment that they can speak, who's the most beautiful girl in the world? I am, daddy. I'm like, well, what can you do if you put your mind to it? I can do anything I want to. The sky's the limit. They didn't have a clue what the sky's the limit meant, but I was putting something in there because eventually they would. They would know they can do anything. They knew what that meant. I could do anything. I knew what that meant. And so I did it, and I constantly did it. And I remember my now 31-year-old. My God, I'm getting my 31-year-old, which is not my oldest. My oldest will be 37 this year. But she also married her first. But I was talking about the 31-year-old because that's a story. One of my sisters thought something was wrong with my now 31 was, I think she was in the ninth grade. And she said, something's wrong with her. Something's not right. She's in ninth grade. She's not talking about boys. She's not boy crazy. I'm concerned. I said, why don't you just ask her why she doesn't have a boyfriend or whatever? And I'm kind of glad she doesn't, but you ask her. And her response, to my sister just made my day. She said, I like boys. I want a boyfriend, but if I can't find one like my daddy, I'm good. And I'm like, did she just say that? And she married her first, like her oldest sister, who married her first. The oldest has been married 16, 17 years, something like that. And going, and marriages aren't perfect, but you set the standard, but you also give them an identity. See, what I didn't want was some little knucklehead coming along and telling her she was beautiful and it blowing her mind because she never heard it before. That's giving a child an identity. Then I told her that she came from me, and the successes that she was seeing me accomplish were just the peak of the iceberg of what she was capable of, and that she was going to do better than me. And I told every last one of them that you get to experience this life because I went out and I did things people said I couldn't. But now you're going to go out and you're going to do things that I haven't. That's the standard I set. You don't wait on anybody to do anything for you. What you're doing is you're empowering them to face the challenges. The problem is when they don't know who they are, and then fronted, they're confronted with all of this negativity. They're fronted with all of this fear mongering. They're confronted with all of the hatred. They're confronted with people sitting down literally trolling them on their social media accounts and being mean to them for no apparent reason except for the fact that they're miserable and they want to make other people miserable, but they can't cope. And then in a lot of instances, they go home to parents that tell them, well, sticks and stones will break your bones. Words can't hurt you. Well, actually, I'd rather get hit with a stick than have a person that has a way to get at me with a word. Now, I've gotten to a point now where words that I know who I am. Hell, I'm 50 something years old. Thankfully, I knew a long time ago because it's allowed me to do a lot. But what am I saying here? I'm saying that we're in crisis. And oh my God, shaking my head. I can't believe it. We got to do better. None of that stuff has any intrinsic value in the process of changing the current reality and creating a better situation for ourselves and for our youth and for our community and for our future. We're going to have to be actively engaged. We're going to have to either find or create programs. I have programs. I am in the process of looking to create other programs so that we can deal when somebody comes to me and says there are 10. And I'm going, okay, that's 10 different kids I'm going to deal with. And I'm coming up with a process that we can do that better. I'm going to create a program where we can do that better. So that's going to make it more efficient. But we still are going to have to be able to have the resources available to do it. And then I'm doing this with boys across the country. I'm doing this with girls and young women across the country. I have made up in my mind that, I'm not turning anyone away. I'll try to find someone else to help until or if it's not too serious, I'll get to you as fast as I can. I'm trying my best, but I have to be careful and know what I can and can't do. But what am I saying? The people we don't help are out there in that community, and they are going to express the reality of their deficiencies in one way or another. And it's going to have a negative impact on the community. They're either going to harm themselves, leave people in shambles and traumatized. They're going to harm other people. They are going to harm other people's property. They're going to create an environment of fear, which only adds more stress and creates more mental anguish and creates more mental illness. We're going to have to start a collective healing process, something that Blacks have never done. You got to think, for the most part, go back beyond 20 years from now, most Blacks didn't even see a value in getting mental health treatment. While we're suffering from unbelievable trauma, there are people out there still making jokes about our traumatic experiences and the traumatic impact that it's had on our lives. Because we're not crazy. This isn't about being crazy. This is about being ill. This is about being in a place of hurt. This is about being in a place of uncertainty. This is about being in a place where if something doesn't change, I'm not going to be as effective as I need to be for the people who really need me to be on my A game. We don't know how to take care of ourselves mentally or emotionally. We don't know how to decompress. We don't know how to download. So we're just packing it all around and it's just building up. It's impacting our decision making. It's impacting the way we interact with one another. It's impacting our ability to survive other stressful events. The more stress you have in your life, the more things you're trying to manage that are negative, the easier it will be when something traumatic happens for you to be traumatized by it. The more mentally stable you are, the more likely you can encounter a traumatic event and not be traumatized by it. There's this thing called a trauma threshold, and you are either moving toward it or away from it. The more you move away from it, the more you'll be able to take at one hit. But if you're right here where your life is just constantly coming at you and you like this close to the threshold, guess what happens when that big thing hits? It will probably bury you. It'll have you so messed up, you will need to be treated, or you might need to be hospitalized. Why? Because we haven't learned how to manage that. There's nobody out there pushing this narrative at a way to say we can't sit on this. This isn't something we can sit on, people. This is something we've got to take action on. And that's something that most of us don't want to talk about. Let me tell you something, then I'm gonna be done. Pretending something doesn't exist does not eradicate it. It does not. We're going to have to stop pretending nothing's wrong. We're going to stop pretending that there isn't a 20-ton white elephant in the room. And I've said this many times before. One of my favorite quotes is the African proverb that says, if there's no enemy on the inside, the enemy on the outside can do us no harm. We are vulnerable to the machinations of the enemy because we are just overwhelmed with the enemy on the inside. We are not doing the work. We're not supporting one another. We're not standing up. We're not taking the proper and appropriate action. And we are sitting around whining and complaining and hoping that it doesn't hit us and just being happy that that ain't me and all the other things that we do that don't serve the collective and ultimately will not serve us because you don't get through this life on an island. We need each other. Black men, you need Black women. We need to be better so that we can rebuild the trust. Black women, you need Black men. If that wasn't so, the Creator wouldn't have created it that way. And I think the Creator knows way more than any of us. Now, the Creator inside of us is saying it's time to heal. And we need to put in the work. So I'm going to leave you with that. I want you to think about that. Don't forget, we've got these programs that are big and huge that we really need to be taking nationally. I'm doing it over here and over there. I'm at Jersey and Wilmington, Delaware, Charlotte, North Carolina, down in Florida, out there in Portland and in Houston and Dallas, all of these places. But it needs to be national. It needs to be a national organized network where we are properly socializing our youth, especially the rite of passage for young Black boys. We've got to condition them and train them and prepare them to be men. If we don't, we are doomed. That's the truth. So support the work we're doing. The link to support is in the description box. If you prefer to give through the organization's Cash App account, you can. The Cash App handle is also in there. But whatever happens, we are going to be ultimately what we do now. 20 years from now will be a result of what we do now. If we sit still and do nothing, it's going to be real bad for our children and ultimately get worse for theirs. So it's up to us. On that note, I'm out of here. You guys, thank you for giving me your time in the middle of the day. I hope you have an unbelievable day. I am out.